Hey nerds, what's up? Today I thought I would talk about this niche author you may have never heard of before named Stephen King. Okay, obviously I'm joking, but this is the author I think I get asked the most about in my comment section. And so today I want to talk a little bit about my history with King and review some of the books I've read in the last couple years of his. So I actually read a couple of King's a long time ago. I'm talking decades ago. And that was a short story collection that, based on Googling, I think was Skeleton Crew. I read it in high school. That's why I didn't remember what the title was. I only remembered some of the stories within it. And then also had an experience with The Stand, which wasn't that great. And we'll talk about it. And after that, I basically didn't read any more Stephen King for literally over a decade. But in the last couple years, I've gotten back into it, and I have read The Green Mile, Misery, The Shining, and 11/22/63, which I actually just finished a couple weeks ago. So, and I loved all four of those, by the way. So even after having a bad experience with The Stand, I've loved all four of those recent King novels. And so I'm kind of like going to be more regularly adding him in to my TBR. I ended up ranking The Green Mile 5, and then Misery 4.5, The Shining 4, and 11/22/63 4.5. And I'm telling you guys that now because as I talk about those books, it's just going to all be spoiler reviews. I just prefer a spoiler review. And so then you can know that I liked them if you haven't read them yet. And you can skip around using the description box below which books you want to hear about, because yeah, I'm not going to do a non-spoiler review. That was it. I just gave you my rankings. That was my non-spoiler review. So yes, I think I read Skeleton Crew back in high school. So that would have been a long time ago, like 20 years ago. And I don't remember a ton about it other than two stories. But I remember really, really liking it. I remembered The Mist, which was fantastic. I still haven't seen any of the Mist movies, but I knew a lot about The Mist. I want to say, when did the new Mist movie come out? Hold on, I gotta Google. Yeah, see, the Mist movie came out in 2007, which is when I was in high school, the very end of high school. So I think I read The Mist because I knew that movie was coming out, even though I never went and saw it. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but whatever. And I also remembered this really scary story about these kids playing in a lake, and there's something on top of the lake, and it like eats them, and that terrified me. Great story. So I really liked that. And then my dad gifted me an unabridged version of The Stand, which I ended up not getting to until a few years later. In fact, several years later, I think. Do you guys ever remember when you read books because you remember the place you read them in? So I'm like remembering the apartment I was living in when I read The Stand. So I think it would have been 2016 maybe when I finally got around to it. And I read like 500 pages of the unabridged Stand, and then I got to a chapter that disgusted me so much I DNF'd it. And if you've been around, you know I do not do that lightly. In fact, I think I've not finished 2 books in the last 2 decades. Like, I forced myself to finish every book, but it just made me feel so gross that I was done. Now, I think it had to do with the character, the kid. I want to say that's what the character's name was, but whenever I say this, everyone seems to know what chapter I'm talking about, so I'm guessing King fans will know. I did love the book up until then, but it was just too much for me, and apparently this is like a known thing that happens to people, but it totally put me off Stephen King, and I did not read my next Stephen King until 2024. This was mostly motivated by 2 things. One, my sister likes a lot of Stephen King, and also read by Kyle. If you've been around the channel, you'll know that he is a good buddy of mine on here, another YouTuber, and he is a major Stephen King fan and was like, you need to get over yourself. Will I ever go back to The Stand? Yes. I think I'm just gonna skip that chapter. From everything I've heard, it's like that's the only chapter that's like that, and everything else is fine. Like, obviously that book is a very intense book, but nothing of that caliber happens again. So I am sure I will go back to The Stand when I feel like it, but that is just kind of my experience. So I first started with The Green Mile, but The Green Mile was a great one to start with because it really bucks, I feel like, a lot of the stereotypes that Stephen King has. And The Green Mile so far has been my favorite, hands down, book that I have read of Stephen King so far. I loved The Green Mile. That was actually one of my top books the year I read it. I think it was in 2024. Just reading a magical realism book from him was very different than I expected. Such great character work, obviously gripping, obviously horrific, like definitely horror elements in it. But it just made me think a lot. I couldn't put it down. I raced through it and just a lot of ideas and thematic elements on what is good and bad and what people will do and what you would do in that situation. Now, I will say the book did gross me out a lot. The scene at the end when they kill him. I'll put it this way. I knew I was never going to watch the adaptation because I could barely make it through reading the novel. But I've recommended that book to so many people. I feel like it's so great. If you want more details on that, you could go to my top 5 books of the year. I read it a few years ago, so I don't have as many things to say about that book, but it definitely was like, okay, it's been too long since I've given King the chance and time to read some new ones. So the next 2 I actually read back to back, Misery and The Shining, for my In Real Life book club. For October, they wanted to do a spooky theme, and no one could agree if we wanted to read The Misery or Shining. So people got to choose which one they wanted to read, and I obviously read both. So starting with Misery, my experience with Misery is that I had seen bits and pieces of the movie because my mom loved that movie growing up. So whenever it was on TV, we would have it on. And so I had seen parts of it. I knew it was about an author who got in an accident and gets taken by his biggest fan. My mom used to always quote that, "I'm your number one fan." So I knew that. And I remembered vaguely seeing a scene where she breaks his legs. But that's all I knew about it. So even though that's a lot, I didn't know a lot of the specifics. This book, man, this was oh my gosh. That honestly, Misery just missed out being one of my books of the year last year. Yeah, I read it last year. It's hard to keep track. Just missed out on being one of my books of the year last year. Gripping, could not put it down. The character work of being in Paul's head really reinforced to me that if I'm going to become a horror reader, I am all about the psychological horror. Based on even just The King I've read and a lot of the George R.R. Martin, that was horror, his short stories, body horror, not for me. Psychological horror, absolutely for me. Now, obviously, Misery had a little bit of body horror in it because Annie is crazy and does crazy things to him. But I feel the most part, this is a book where all we are is in Paul's head as he is being psychologically tortured in someone's house, and I loved it. And a lot of the literary devices King uses in this to make it even more horrific. I remember when I was reading it, and at some point I thought I had missed something because suddenly he's talking about his thumb being a problem. And I'm wait, what happened? And I was going back and being did I miss something? And then realizing you're not going to get that part of the story till later. I love that sort of just juxtaposition of how he told the story and just how stressed I was anytime he went into Annie's house and all when she was gone and he would explore the house. And of course, just the most brilliant character work, even though I already kind of knew this because of the movie, but the brilliant character work of Annie being a serial killer, but not liking swear words. That is the juxtaposition of that is just such brilliant character work. It's one of those things you're I wish I would have thought of that. At the end, one of my favorite parts of the novel is how upset I was when I thought that Paul actually burnt his manuscript. I love when an author gets me to care very deeply about an inanimate object as if it's a character, and we had been reading what's happening to Misery. We've been reading this story, and you kind of, in this weird way, want that story to be a success, even though it's being written under duress. And so when I thought that he burnt it, I was devastated. And then finding out he didn't burn it, I was so excited. And just the psychological of that being his best-selling novel that he wrote. Anyway, there's just a lot to unpack, and totally deserves all its fame. I really love the novel. In fact, it was a novel, I gave it a 4.5. And then the further I get from it, it's one of those novels where I'm maybe I should give it a 5. I love when that happens because sometimes I'll give a book a high score and then the more I think about it, the less I like it. This was the opposite. The more I think about Misery, the more I like it. So really, really great. And then I read The Shining at the same time, and The Shining was really good. I get why it's so famous, but I wasn't as transported as much. I didn't like it quite as much as Misery. Now, The Shining, I like to say that I only knew incorrect things about because I hadn't seen the movie, but I had seen bits and pieces, like clips of the movie. So I specifically remembered seeing "Here's Johnny." And I knew that because we quoted that all the time in my family because my dad's name is John. So we would always say, "Here's Johnny." And twins, a bike down a long, creepy hallway. I knew that it was about a guy who goes insane. That was about it. I knew it was about a hotel. So I like to say, like, I knew wrong things because none of that stuff is in the novel. So congratulations. It was like being blind. So this one, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I gave it a 4. I thought there was a lot of good elements. I just, it wasn't quite like The Green Mile or Misery. I didn't feel quite as transported by it. There were some really good creepy scenes, but I actually just wasn't as scared reading The Shining. Like, Misery scared me more than The Shining. I just didn't feel as connected to it. Here's what I would guess. I haven't seen the movie, but what I'd guess is that they definitely didn't give the movie character the same depth as the book character. Jack in the novel is a very complicated person who's clearly dealing with addiction, but then also dealing with the hotel driving him insane. But I think there's a lot of nuance there because Jack isn't a good person before he goes crazy because of the hotel. He's trying to change, but there's a lot of stuff he does that's like, even before then. And so there was kind of like this middle point of the novel where I remember thinking, is there a supernatural force happening to Jack right now? Or is this just actually Jack? And I like that was my favorite part of the novel, this kind of no man's zone of not really knowing if something supernatural is happening to Jack or if this is just his worst tendencies that he naturally has that is being brought about because of the isolation. And I think that's a very interesting character moment that I would just highly doubt is in the book. I'm sorry, I would highly doubt is in the movie. Yeah, I liked that exploration. And then I love the character Halloran. Is that his name? Halloran? The one who tells the kid that he has the Shining and kind of comes to the rescue at the end. Really liked him. Was really scared for him at the end of the novel. But yeah, so The Shining I think is probably one of his most famous ones, and I, along with Misery, and I just preferred Misery. Okay, and last but not least, the one I just finished a couple weeks ago, 11/22/63, which I gave a 4.5. What a great novel. Really unexpected. I knew nothing about this going in except that it had to do with the assassination of JFK. Obviously, it was like the date, it's on the cover. That's all I knew. This is going to sound so stupid. I didn't know it was a time travel novel. I thought it was just going to take place in the 60s. Like when I say I knew nothing, I mean I knew nothing. So when I started, then it's like immediately time travel. It's like, oh, that's kind of exciting. This is one of those novels that you're just like, yes, it needed to be this long because you go through such a gamut of emotions of being kind of lulled into a false sense of what's going to happen and security and just the idea of being in the past for that long and what would happen. And I particularly liked, there's a lot of things I liked, but a couple of my favorite parts is, when he first goes back to save Harry and, he doesn't really succeed and he goes back and it's only slightly okay. And then he finds out that he was killed in Vietnam. And then he goes back and doesn't even let it get that far. He just goes to the graveyard and kills the dad. And there was this question I had where it's like, it reminded me a little of Minority Report. I know they're not at all alike because in Minority Report, you're seeing the future and then stopping something. In this one, you already are 100% positive that thing happened in the past. But there's still kind of this ethical question, isn't there? About like, he just went back and in cold blood murdered the dad because he knew what was going to happen. And I don't know. There was just some interesting questions about if you'd be able to do that. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do that. I really wouldn't. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And then as it keeps going and the past is obstinate and it doesn't want to be changed, I think King did a really good job because if by chance, there's probably very little chance. It's a very old video, but I read all of the Hugo winners in the 2010s. And one book about time travel is called Blackout. And although I loved the idea of that novel, one thing I complain a lot about is it kind of deals with the whole, like, the past doesn't want to be changed. The past is difficult. It's going to keep interrupting you. And I just thought it was not done well at all. Like, at some point you're just like, oh my gosh, just like, can we get a move on in this novel? Like, can we go, please? Stop. Like, it was so frustrating to read. And so it was really interesting seeing that same concept. But when Stephen King used it, he used it to like just much greater effect, in my opinion, because he was able to do it in a way that felt inevitable and created a lot of anxiety in me as a reader, but wasn't just so frustrating. It wasn't me going, okay, when are we going to get over this? Instead, at the climax, when he's finally going to kill Lee Harvey Oswald and Sadie's with him, you just feel so much anxiety and you don't feel frustrated, even though everything's still going wrong. It's because, like, I think there's been enough setup that you know that that is what is going to happen. And you're feeling so frustrated the whole time, like, dude, you've had months. Why did you wait till the last second? The only reason I gave it a 4.5, and I think this will be an unpopular opinion, so I'm very excited to share it, is just like, I thought the ending was slightly cheesy. When he like goes and finds Sadie and she's like 80, I thought it was a little cheesy. I'm speaking my truth. I had no problem with the romance otherwise. It's cute. It was a little bit of a cheesy end. I would have loved I don't think it needed it. It's probably good there wasn't there. I could have used a little bit more time back in the present after he succeeds in killing Oswald, only because I thought it was terrifying. Like, again, one of my favorite parts of the novel is he succeeds in killing Oswald and he's about to go back, and you hear about this earthquake. And I heard the earthquake and I heard the number of people have died. And immediately I was like, oh, the world is resetting to kill maybe the same amount of people. That was like my initial thought, was like, oh, the same amount of people need to die no matter what. But then he goes back and it's just like horrible because the past didn't want to change. Very eerie, very horrific. And you just like know it's all building for that. But I do like that I didn't know how the novel was going to end. I remember I kept feeling like, okay, is this going to go into huge fantasy realm? Okay. Let me explain myself. It's time travel. I understand it's speculative. What I mean is, if Jake succeeded and the world was hunky-dory and JFK wasn't assassinated, now we're into like a full alt historical timeline is all I'm saying. We're in full alt history. Whereas if he fails or if it wasn't good, then technically this is like a novel that could happen because maybe he did go in the past and we just don't know because it all stayed the same. Do you get what I'm saying? But I didn't know. I didn't know how it was going to end. And I think in a novel like this, it could be very easy to be able to predict an ending. So yeah, I liked that. It was quite an achievement. I thought it was a very good book. And one thing I really loved is like The Green Mile, Misery and The Shining, and then 11/22/63 were all very different, right? We kind of had like my more classic horror, what I was thinking of, but then we had a magical realism and kind of like this alt history, and kind of showed me a really nice breadth of what Stephen King can do. So yeah, you can consider me a casual Stephen King fan. I don't think I'm ever going to read his entire bibliography. There's just some authors where I really feel immediately the desire to do that. In this case, I don't necessarily, but I do look forward to just slowly incorporating some of his works. So I think what I'm looking at next is the short story collection that has The Shawshank Redemption in it. I'm interested in that. I've seen bits and pieces of The Shawshank Redemption, more than bits and pieces. I've seen a lot of that movie, so I know mostly what it's about. So I'm very curious to read that one, and then we'll see what the future holds for me. I'd gotten a lot of questions about my Stephen King journey, and here it is. So yes, you can call me a light Stephen King fan. I'm sure I'll be reading a lot over the next few years here and there. So tell me what you thought of these Stephen King novels. Tell me about your experience with The Stand. Tell me, you can tell me which ones you want me to read next, but let's be honest, I probably won't listen. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That's the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.